What I'm going to be speaking about today, and what my presentation will be focusing on, is how do we use location and space to attract, recruit, integrate, and retain employees, the future talents. And the talents could be the generation next, which we have a panel coming a little bit later to speak, or it could also be the ones on moving towards retirement, where we don't want them to leave and we want to say, hey, how can we get you to stay longer? One thing could be the benefits package. It could be the hours work package. It could also be, hey, I don't want to commute into the city anymore. I want to commute to a local hub. How can we use our locations in new and different ways to support the number one challenge that companies are facing, attracting and retaining talent? And now I've been working on the future of space and the future of place in the digital age, and what does all that mean? And in my long work with facility managers, with architects, with corporate real estate people, they've all said, hey, how do we come up to the top of the value chain? How can we talk strategy and business with decision makers? And if you want to be able to speak to the top, to the strategy decision makers, and speak at a strategic level, you have to be able to come with an offer about how you use your service, the provision of space, to help them solve their challenges, how to attract and retain future workers. So that's what the presentation will be about. I won't be going into the how-tos of doing it. We could talk about that and have a nice strategic discussion, and I could bore you all to death with that, but I will try not to do that here. So, the big discussion. Yes, location matters, and when we talk about real estate and things like that, we talk location, location, location. It's all about that. Location matters because, as we've heard from Andrew's presentation and from Katarina, that locations now, due to globalization, are exposed to global competition. We are in competition with each other at a regional level. It's cities against cities. Within countries, it's capital cities versus the second and third tier cities. It's also one of the most important decisions a company will make. If you look at where companies spend their money, of course, 80% of it is spent on their employees. That's the number one source. But the second post is on their real estate, 20% of it. And it's ridiculous if you think that you're not having that 20% support what you need the 80% to do. And if you don't have it aligned, you're not using it strategically. If you make a poor decision, it impacts your fixed costs, it impacts your variable costs, and you're stuck with a lodestone around your neck. And in many companies, when we talk about the shift in business models, a bad real estate strategy will drown the organization if they're caught out in a real estate portfolio that they can't get out of. Classic examples of this are if you take of any electronic retailer, when Borders, or actually it was Barnes & Nobles, when Borders and Barnes & Nobles, the two big bookstores that went bankrupt, their real estate portfolio, 3,000 stores, they were valued at nothing. Barnes & Noble's valuation was a couple $100 million, and that was for its e-reader. So these are one of these things. If you don't think strategically, you're going to have some problems. It's important because decisions about it are made relatively infrequently. So when you make it, you better make it count. Okay, what are some of the challenges? I have my little bluff, so if you forget everything about my presentation, and you'll probably forget most of the things I say right now, that's the way it is, there's three things I'd like to have as the focus on the challenges. One, we have new demands, changing demographics. We heard about this a little bit before. We'll come into it in a little bit more detail a bit later. We have something that, as we're all aware of, it affects all organizations, and the competition is fierce. And the competition and the attraction of talents using space is actually emerging from areas where you probably haven't thought about it before. The solution is very simple. One, we say be strategic. That's a nice way of, another way of saying it, and Andrew here is laughing at me. We could say be bold. It's about making a damn choice. You have to make a choice and stick to it, because all strategies are choices. When strategy consultants get together, we like to use the term strategic. It makes us feel good. And then, again, as I was coming in a bit before, we have to utilize all our assets actively. And we have to think about, as an industry, is how we work together with our HR and to assist our clients with how do we use these assets actively to be attractive places where people will want to come to work and not just work for somewhere else, because now we can work from anywhere and everywhere, as every marketing video that comes out from any IT company has said for the last 25 years. Nothing new there. So, going in a little bit about the challenge. So, one of the challenges is we have new demands, new realities. So we have this old way of thinking about physical space, which is we get together in a workplace and we talk and interact with one another, and that's on the left-hand side of the screen. And we've had this online world that's been very separate. And this little voting activity that we had you do is this representation of this hybrid reality. And this hybrid reality is this new augmented way of doing business where the virtual and the physical merge together for entirely new ways of doing business. So, if you want to take some examples of a hybrid reality, many of you are here not only to hear what we have to say, but are here to network with each other. And some of the new examples, I think, of LinkedIn 4.0 will be integrating at the device, who should I network with? Hold your smartphone up and say, okay, that person's not interesting, unemployed, they're going to ask me for a job. Okay, I'll talk to this person here. The other aspect, which I think is interesting because it shows the importance of space in the physical age, is this example here of a robot that has an iPad strapped to the top of the robot. It's kind of like a Segway with an iPad strapped to it, that drives around the office with a remote worker working from home who's going from meeting to meeting in a physical workspace. And so that means that not being physically present still means something. And not being physically present will mean something in the future. There is a role for the physical. The physical is important because it brings us together and helps us create an organization, helps us create a culture, and you have to think about how do we bring this all together to make it actually work. Okay. We had lots of discussions on new demands and changing demographics, so I won't go into detail about that. I'll just pluck a little bit from this slide. One of the things about leadership being a challenge is the most important aspect, and most organizations are we aware of struggle with it, and most people actually are very bad at it. But one of the new things that we see about in the changing demands is that we're changing from hierarchical organizations to networked organizations. And you're changing from an old type of leadership, which is do that and I expect this, to I want to active and involved leadership. That has an impact on the accessibility of leaders and how you use space to interact with them. So when a young employee comes into the office, they don't want to see a long aisle of offices. The boss may be at the end, and do I really dare go knock on the door and say, hey, I have an idea that I want to bring up? No, you want to be interacting, and you have the expectation, and when you see the surveys and you hear from Generation Next, they often say, I have an expectation that when I come into the workplace, I can change something. Those older style offices don't reflect that ability. When you start talking about, is Generation Y or Generation Z, do they really have different expectations to the workspace? When you see actually what they do and you analyze the statistics, and CBRE has done some of this in the US, and we have done some as well, what you actually see is that it's actually the work function that people has. It has a bigger determinant upon how they see the workspace. If they need spaces to focus and need spaces to concentrate. So even though they are different, don't make it into everything and make it be everything. That said, there are expectations to the workspace that are different. One of the aspects is they expect to be able to learn and add new skills on the job. And it's about employability. So when we talk about this contingency workforce and we talk about the need for job security and things like that, it's not about having a long-term job, it's how do I make the play for the next one. So while you're there, can you acquire a new skill? Are there spaces in the workspace where I can go in and learn something new? It's about the ability to collaborate. And when you see the statistics, the importance about collaboration in the workspace and the spaces needed to support that is something that you see in a much higher degree from the generations coming into the marketplace than what we've previously seen. And also we've had this notion a little bit about branding from Katarina's presentation, this notion about being authentic. A brand that is unauthentic is something that gets called out rather quickly. And so if you have an organization that stands for inclusion, stands for teamwork, all these aspects, if you're not living up to it, down into the physical space, you're not authentic. You're failing in the delivery of what you promise. So you have to think that full level all the way through. How are you authentic? Now, we've seen the thing, talent attraction is a huge problem. This is just from the last few weeks in Denmark. So for the English-speaking people in the audience, Denmark has had 7 years of stagnation after a period of recession, which most places in Europe has. We've had 1 quarter of growth. 1 quarter of growth, we say, oh my God, the economy is going to overheat, and it's on the top of every political debate that's going on right now. So we have the liberal parties, liberal not being American liberal with my accent, but liberal being European liberal, think that, oh, even though the economy isn't better, we got huge problems. Talent and labor is the big one. If you're out in the suburbs, we lack good qualified labor. Hjørring Kommune is going to attract people who are receiving social benefits to the community because they need employees. So we have the challenge. This is just a view from Denmark. As said, won't spend time because we've been talking about this, is that you have competition. You have these regional areas, and if you're talking about your location strategy from a global perspective and going to a European perspective, why choose Copenhagen versus others? And we have to say that according to the EU and some of the other regional competitive indexes and statistics, Denmark is in a bit of a struggle. You have Holland, number 1. You have various cities in the UK in the top 5, and Denmark struggling along in the bottom of the top 10. And so that's an interesting challenge because you could have the debate going on. Who's the motor of growth in Denmark? People say it's Aarhus and Copenhagen. There's a debate saying we should forget the provinces. But if you see about the competition within Denmark itself, the dark green areas are the ones growing strongly. The red areas are the one in decline. You have this notion about where should you position yourself in your society. How can you, if you find yourself outside Aarhus, Copenhagen, and Aalborg, how can you position your organization to be attractive to employees, to hold on to them? Are there different ways you could think about your location strategy to keep and attract some employees to you? Now, these are some places that some of the factors that attract people to live in your areas. So yes, you need this critical mass of employers, and this is Andrew's presentation coming about companies coming together in the city about how they can pool their mobility strategies together. It's about the ability of thinking about the city in a context, in a broader aspect. It's not just you trying to attract talent to your organization. It's about you using the environment around you in collaboration with it to attract it. So your location is broader than just your 4 walls of your organization. You have to think a little bit more broadly about that. And this is this notion of what's the attractive location then. You've had this debate over the last, or not debate, but this trend over the last several years, predominantly inspired by where I come from, the US, where we said, hey, it's cheaper to move to the suburbs. A lot of people live there anyways, so we're going to move our corporate headquarters out there. And then in the 80s, these became expanded with bowling alleys, cafeterias, and all these other amenities for the workplaces, with the idea that the workers should not want to leave the location. They should be there, no excuse to go. We offer dry cleaning, dental services, the whole 9 yards. Now, these are cocoons. And what we talk about the future worker is someone who's dynamic, involved with the environment, being inspired by other aspects. So unless you're a Google or an Apple or a Facebook, who can afford to have the gigantic campus with the most luxurious that could attract the best and the best brands? You're going to cocoon yourself and separate yourself from the world around you and be one step behind the offer. So what you're seeing is this new dynamic of new types of competition. And we've been talking company to company. That's not really the real type of competition. If you look at the new emerging companies, they're the startups. They're the ones that when you look at, these are the ones that are creating the real shifts and moves. And if you look at one of the most prominent types of job titles you have among the next generation, it's not employee XYZ. 1/5 have owner of some startup or another. And they're actually working from co-working locations. working from home or co-working locations. Now, why co-working locations? What do they offer that a typical organization has? And if I want to attract some of these creative, entrepreneurial types into my organization, do I need to change the way I think about how I manage my space, how I manage my workflows to make it attractive for them? So, one thing that these spaces offer is not just the space itself, it's all the supporting services around it. So they focus on networking, creating spaces for people to meet. They focus on a great deal of flexibility, the ability to move and share different spaces. So spaces to learn, spaces to focus, spaces to socialize, spaces to party, places for professional sparring, where they actually have lawyers, accountants, things like that ready to assist you when you need a moment of assistance. Many of them focus on you have to be a part of this industry to participate. So co-working spots for tech industries only. So if you have a tech problem, you can network together. Networking for creative types only. So these are the aspects. They're low risk. You can get out of it. So if you want to talk about ultimate flexibility, a 5-year, 10-year contract is something that they don't need to have. Daily basis. Most of them go with monthly basis. And the thing about these is if you want to see the thing that gets the most of the people there and then what they think the best aspect is the socializing, the ability to meet. So the drinks on a Friday night are the things that get the co-workers together and working in these environments. Now, what does this mean for you who are corporates? The solution. Be strategic, be bold, whatever you want to call it, make a choice. But it's about understanding what you want to do and what you need your leaders to do, and how do you get the organization to find that goal? Is it a co-working strategy? Is it some other strategy you need to take into account? You need to know what it is, your vision, and what you intend to achieve. Then you can ask the question, want to move to a new location. That's great. Should you actually be doing the activity from that location, or should you do it from somewhere else? That's a fundamental question that you should be asking. What employees do we need to have? Are they here locally? Are they somewhere else? What behavior do they need to do to actually help us get where we want to go? And do we provide the spaces for them to do that here or somewhere else? Does a specific location support this? And are we using that asset that we spend so much of our resources on to their full effect? These are some of the questions that you have to think about when thinking about your location strategy. So when you're doing this, it's going beyond thinking about what's in the physical four walls of your organization. It's about thinking about how can you utilize the public and private spaces. Are there things in the natural environment that can let people outdoors, get some fresh air, which we're going to need soon, and get some different activities involved? What is the built environment that you could leverage, and what type of social environment that you could do? And while you do this, you have to think about what type of visibility and branding do you put into it? And branding is not about slapping your logo all over the place within the organization and not having it on your whiteboard, for example, in a meeting room, because yes, we know we're at your location. I don't need it there. But how do you create this integration of your brand and what you actually stand for, your values in a physical location? Do you actually have a reputation? Are you authentic? Do you have some sort of purpose and reflect this into your community? These are some of the big challenges that come into play with this. And when we do our statistics and analyses, because that's what we do at Signal, we work evidence-based, and we ask a question about how well does the physical workspaces actually support the organization. And of all the employees that we survey every year, we get a response that 30% of the employees at a given workspace do not think that their workplaces reflect their organization values and identity. And they give it very badly or not at all. So we're talking the bottom. So the bottom of the barrel. And then another aspect is, if you're talking attraction and retention, are you proud to bring people to your workspace? And this is something 1/5 of the employees that we survey, they're not proud to bring external people, customers, clients, whoever. If you're talking talent attraction and retention, you only got one shot to make a first impression. So you have to think about what type of signal are you trying to send. And so if any of you know the American film Office Space, it's a good one to see. I highly recommend it. But it says a lot about how you treat people, how you treat customers, and how your employees treat each other. So yes, you can have a messy, and we can have a discussion about mess in the office. This place is great for creativity and all these type of discussions. But when you walk in the door, you can go into this office, and it's a little bit difficult to see here, of where you walk in and you see a bunch of cell offices, and it could be great if you have to focus on concentration, and that's all you do. But I could tell you, looking at the statistics, that even the guys, the tech developers, who spend 70% of their time concentrating, they need alternative spaces to do that in. So giving them just this aspect isn't that great. But if you think about it as a new recruit and you walk into this and say, what's my career projection as I'm going through the door and I'm choosing between an organization, have I an ability to influence this? Could I talk to the boss on day one? You're going to have a rough time in this version. Whereas if you're working more open and dynamic and flexible and adjustment, you see the ability to actually influence and make a decision. So my little pitch, my little run through about my presentation, the last things, be bold, be strategic, whatever you want to call it, make a choice and be authentic to that choice in your design and live it out. And then when you do that, make sure to utilize your assets. It's an important thing to think about because you spend in most companies, their assets are 25 to 50% real estate. 20% of your expenditure is on your real estate. So use that 20% to affect the 80% and deliver on it. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for your attention, and pretty soon we're going to have the panel debate.